Yes, I did that, and we started recording.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. Welcome, everybody. I can see who is with us at this point, and I know many of you, and there are some of you whom I do not know, and that's fine. Looking forward to meeting you. The assumption on this call is that all of you who are on this call are familiar with the CCAT, familiar with interpreting the CCAT, and this webinar is to take you to the next step, which is to familiarize you with the way that we've been using the CCAT, primarily in what we call capacity building learning communities. And I'm going to take you through this. We will have time at the end. I will make sure to leave time at the end for some questions. But I just wanted to note that, you know, if there are any folks on the call who are not familiar with the CCAT, I would invite you to join us for some of the sort of CCAT 101 webinars that we'll be hosting coming up, because I'm not going to go through the nuts and bolts and the guts of the CCAT in this call. I'm taking us to the next stage. It might be a little difficult for those of you who are not familiar with the CCAT to follow that. So I would invite you to join in for future webinars. You're, of course, more than welcome to listen on this if you'd like. So with that said, let's advance to the next slide. Keisha, I am not able to do that with my arrows, so I'm not quite sure how to make that happen. Oh, here, I see. I can do it right here. I'll move it to this one. Okay, there we go. All right, so what are we going to do today? We want to talk about this whole construct that is explained as a framework in our Capacity Building 3.0 paper. Several of my colleagues and I came up with a paper that is on our website, and we will send to you all, if you have not seen it after this webinar, happily. It's called Capacity Building 3.0. It takes the framework of capacity building and suggests that we think about it slightly differently, and as a result of that, we've begun to, it throws into question the who needs their capacity built, the for what capacity should be built, and the how that capacity is being built. And the how is answered by, for now, with this thing that we call targeted capacity building, and we're going to talk through that, what the particular roles are of the participants and those who are engaged in that, as well as the nuts and bolts of what constitutes that, what we do, how we use the data in the CCAT to move it further and get much more granular and much deeper understanding on the part of the nonprofits who have participated in taking the CCAT. Then we're going to talk about this thing we call the win-win. It is based on our notion that I will talk about in just a second, that capacity building is no longer considered in the purview of the nonprofits alone, but that all of the actors in the social sector need to have their capacity built if we're going to solve complex social problems. And then this concept of what it means to build a capacity building learning community and have that be sustainable in the community, and not just something that a funder, one single funder or a group of funders do that is short-lived and is one opportunity and then it's done. And then the nonprofits are basically on their own to hopefully reap the benefits of that. But in most cases, what happens is there's a lack of continuity, and we would posit that the ROI on those investments on the part of funders probably needs to be thought through a different way. So in that sense, let's go to the next slide. We'll start with the who needs to build capacity and for what notion. So as we said, in our CB 3.0 paper, we talk about this notion of solving complex problems, and that is impossible to do as a single nonprofit organization. That said, organizations need to be invested in understanding what we call their relationship with other nonprofits in the sector, but it's not simply the other nonprofits till now is really in a one-directional way. It's a one-way relationship. It's normally gone from funders to nonprofits so that the nonprofits can actually build their own organizational capacity. We've rethought that, and our notion at this point is that we really believe that it's about relational capacity, and it's about every one of the actors in the social sector building their capacity. So it's the funders and the others that need to be in relationship with the nonprofits collaboratively. Some folks call this collective impact. Our friends at FSG have done a tremendous job of pushing this idea into the social sector so that it's, in many cases, a household word. The notion of collective impact, of course, is that all of the actors in a community are committed to working together to identify and solve a common social problem. The problem we've all, including our friends at FSG, have recognized is that it's an assumption that once a decision is made to do that, that in fact all of those players have the capacity to be able to do that, and that in fact is not necessarily the case. It is often the case that in order to be able to solve problems collectively, there's a step before or alongside that collective impact work that is about building the relational capacity of everyone in what we call the social sector ecosystem. We work a lot in a place-based way in which we use all of the players in a region or a particular rural or urban setting are working together. At the same time, we have worked in a content-connected way where a group of organizations and a group of funders, say, interested in LGBT work or interested in environmental justice work across the country, have come together to build that ecosystem, that sector, social sector ecosystem. So we posit this idea, we pose this idea in Capacity Building 3.0 that capacity building has evolved over the last 20 or so years, that initially we were delivering it to individuals, we were delivering skills and knowledge to them, we were doing it through workshops and trainings and seminars. We realized, of course, that that was not really helpful to building the capacity of organizations, since organizations would very often lose those leaders whose capacity had been built and would be at square one because the leader that had received the capacity building investment had moved along either to another organization in the sector or somewhere completely different, and that the organization had not in fact built its capacity at all. So we went into what we call 2.0 mode, where organizations were the focal point of the capacity building, and we were trying to build capacity of organizations as a whole. This notion of different functions in an organization were addressed at the same time. We came up with what we call our CCAT at that time, where we were dealing with measuring the leadership, the adaptive, the management, and the technical capacity of an organization across all functions, as well as the organizational culture. The way we brought organizations along were usually in capacity building initiatives that involved multiple stakeholders in the organization, including board members. Often folks would go to trainings or would work on initiatives together, learning about what it is, trying to prioritize on a very high level what it is they needed to work on, guessing what it is that they felt was most in need of work, and then proceeding to get training in that, but as an organization as a whole. We've moved now in our thinking to the notion that it's actually the entire ecosystem that needs to have its capacity built. What that means is that the funders and all of the players who are actually responsible for moving the needle, as they say, on any complex social issue, all need to have their capacity built. What do they need? They need their ability to relate to each other to be enhanced, and in that sense, what that means is that all of the players need to build their ability to work with each other. They need to first have the awareness that what they're needing to do is work with the others in the social sector, in their social sector. So the acknowledgement that it is important to work within the ecosystem, and that as an organization, most of your decisions, your strategic decisions, the capacities that you need to build are going to have to be influenced by what others are doing. The second piece of that is that an organization needs to be actually engaging in cross-sector conversations and within that ecosystem intentionally and deliberately. And the third piece of that is that the organization needs to be willing to build its capacity to do that, whatever that means internally and structurally. And so the capacities that are most in need of building need to be determined by an acknowledgement that it really does depend on what others are doing, those others who are trying to solve the problem. And focusing on what it is that is most essential to be able to do that is what nonprofits, as well as funders, as well as the networks themselves, as well as the businesses, the governments, and what we call MSOs, or management support organizations, or individual consultants or capacity builders in a community, all need to be building their relational capacity, and they all need to be acknowledging that they are building their capacities for the ability to solve these complex social problems. So all of these actors that you see on your screen are simultaneously investors in the capacity building process, some through money, some through time, some through staffing, but all investors. Everyone is a co-learner. Everyone is communicating knowledge to the other, and very deliberately and consciously doing so. And every one of these folks is a change agent that must be contributing to the larger solving of a complex social problem. All right? These are what we've been doing at TCC is we've been engaging with communities in what we call capacity building learning communities. We work in partnership with either a single funder or a group of funders in a particular place-based community, or as I've talked about, a content-based collective that is not necessarily regional or geographically focused, but is content-specific, certain kinds of organizations dedicated to hunger relief or to various common content. We work in a particular environment with the nonprofits, with the funders who are interested in solving this problem, and that includes the public funders, the private funders, the corporate funders, the businesses in town, and local consultants who are on the ground, and this would be most of you who are on the phone. And so appreciating and understanding what your role is, really important role, because what we've shifted to at TCC is the notion that we want to be working in close partnership with you on the ground with your local funders and your local community, because it's you that really needs to be delivering this capacity building on an ongoing basis. We have taken to setting the frame in this context. So in terms of our roles in this four-part partnership, learning partnership that is a capacity building learning community, the funder or the funders, there's usually an anchor funder or set of two that pushes this forward. I'm meeting in Miami, for example, this coming week with a collective group of funders, nonprofits, all types of funders, community organizations, corporate funders, et cetera, as well as local capacity building consultants to talk about evolving a capacity building learning community in the Miami area in South Florida. There's a direction setting on the part of the funder, what it is those funders want to be. It's really important for them to acknowledge what their goals are in moving into this type of a common desire to raise the entire social sector ability to solve these problems, to be able to work in partnership with each other and develop the capacities that are necessary to do that. There is a constant there's a commitment on the part of the funders that is necessary. There's a commitment on the part of the organizations, the nonprofits themselves, to work with the local consultants as well as the funders as an information provider, and to be generously providing feedback to all of these parties. And what this involves is an investment on the front end by the funders, and we'll go through this as I wrap up the webinar in the next 40 minutes. But there is a commitment to doing this on a long term by all players. There is an understanding that the funders are investing upfront with this cross-sector group with monetary investment to both support bringing these players together, changing the culture of the way that capacity building has been thought about in the community, so that there's an investment in the nonprofits in a process that consultants or capacity builders are absolutely essential to take on. If you're going to successfully move through this process, it involves data plus external neutral third-party facilitation to be able to really target what it is the nonprofits need to be focusing on at this point in their life cycle, all right? So we use, and so the local capacity building providers, as I told you, are essential to delivering the capacity and being a learning partner. And our role as TCC Group has been to collaborate with everyone on the ground, from local capacity builders to the funders, and to make sure that what's put in place is a system and a learning loop to be able to work in this way moving forward. So how does this actually take place? So we start by, administering the CCAT. So the funders are on board. Before the CCAT is even administered, though, there are a series of meetings in which the various players on what we call the capacity building development team or the steering committee, or it's usually a group of representatives in the community, all of whom have a stake in raising the capacity of the entire nonprofit sector. So sometimes in the case of Austin, for example, the St. David's Foundation was the anchor funder there. They have about 50 local grantees, about 38 of those participated in this initiative, and they took the CCAT. In other cities, such as Greenville, South Carolina, you've got all of the local regional funders working together and pooling all of their grantees and figuring out that they will, or how wide they'll cast the net and what size pilot group they will use of which nonprofits in the community, okay? So you've got a representative group that comes together, decides how they want to proceed and what their goals are for this initiative, and then the CCAT is administered to a pilot or a target group. Once the CCAT results are there, we use them in a much deeper way than you probably are used to using them in a straight interpretation for a single organization. We start with the individual organizations, each understanding what we call their targeted capacity building need. And we ask them to use the data they get in the CCAT, but prior to doing that, we ask a couple of other relational questions that are in a supplementary survey, right? So we ask each of the nonprofits to really just to look through a couple of lenses as they interpret their CCAT results. One of the lenses is a what kind of organization are you lens that asks them to say, are you a micro, macro, or hybrid organization? We ask them about the communities with which they work. Who are the other folks in your social sector that are essential for you to be working with? And what are your growth aspirations? As an organization, do you intend to grow? Do you want to have more impact over the next few years? Do you want to do more, solve more problems, treat more individuals if you're a health organization, et cetera? Do you want to go deeper in the way that you work? What does more impact look like? The reason we ask these questions is because we need to use those lenses then to look at the results of the CCAT. And I'm going to go into much greater depth in this in a second. The next stage we use, or the next step in this process, is to look at the current life cycle stage that the organization has placed itself in. The third piece of this process, and I'm going to go through all of these in greater detail in just a second. I'm just mapping for you what the full six-step process looks like for now. What are the priority capacity strengths and challenges? So this is using the CCAT data and using a slightly more in-depth look at each of the capacities, the core capacities and the sub-capacities in each of the 4 core areas, plus organizational culture, and aligning what is page 11 in your CCAT report, which has the prioritized recommendations on it, taking a look at that and really honing in on which of the 4 core capacities feels like it is most integral and most essential in where you are at your life cycle stage as an organization, okay? And I'll talk more about that in a second. We hone in on that, and then we go into a how do you make this happen piece where the organization really focuses on how to make the change, the actual change in building capacity take place. We look at who in the organization needs their capacity built and how ready are they to build their capacities, and what are these specific type of capacities that are necessary, and where would they best be sought and found. And then finally, once you understand what you need, for whom you need, how ready are those people to take in that support that they need and deserve to make the organizational change, what are the resources you need to be able to do that? Sometimes it's within the organization, sometimes it's external, and sometimes it is with a consultant, and yet we know much more about what it would look like were the capacity to be built in relationship with others in the community so that you can build a several-page case study to be able to present that to your foundation partners who are on the waiting end in a capacity building learning community to receive those from the organizations and then to be able to provide the support that's necessary. But the funders in the community, because they have this depth of information, are able to cluster the organizations and to provide just the kind of capacity building that is most needed and has the best chance with that investment to really make a difference. So let's go through these one at a time. I'm conscious of time, and I think we're doing well. I will make sure to leave room for questions. Again, as I said earlier, the first question that we ask, and we have a worksheet that we will be happy to share with many of you who would like to investigate this further, although we would welcome you to call us, because one of the things we have learned is that the ability to have an outside partner, a neutral third party from outside the community, if you are a capacity builder in a given community, the ability to have TCC Group come in and help set this community up is very, very advantageous for many, many reasons, not the least of which is that at the end of the day, we're going to leave you, the capacity builders in the community, to really run this, and we step back and we're the advisors, but you've got a sustainable mechanism in place where you're all working together on an ongoing basis to be able to continue to build the entire social sector capacity. So the first step here is an organization asks itself, are we a micro organization, are we a macro organization, or are we what we call a hybrid organization? And in this sense, a micro-organization we define as an organization that delivers direct services to individuals or small groups of people or communities as a whole sometimes, but that is the sole mission of the organization, is the delivery of those services. And on the other side, we have what we call macro-organizations, where the primary purpose of the organization is to shift or change or adapt the way that society works on the larger scale, meaning you're trying to shift societal attitudes around things, you're trying to change policy. There are organizations that are working on an advocacy basis. That type of an organization, a policy or a straight advocacy organization that does not deliver services, we would call a macro organization. There are many, many organizations with which we work that we call hybrid organizations, where there is a direct delivery of services on the ground, and there is a component of the work that works on lobbying or advocacy or trying to change societal attitudes in order to make it possible for the changes to take place in society that they're trying to move further through their direct service delivery. So there are many organizations that do both, and we find that that is happening more and more for direct service organizations who need to not necessarily be leading, but be taking part with others who are leading in their communities on a larger societal change level. Now, the reason we ask this to start with is just to have a sense of that, because the capacities that you need if you're a macro organization versus the capacities that you need if you're a straight micro organization or a hybrid organization actually are quite different. So looking at your CCAT report with that lens and being able to articulate what your particular story is as an organization, as a nonprofit, becomes very important in your facilitation while you're using the CCAT, all right? The next question we ask, this is still part of step one, is who does make up your ecosystem? Who are all of the other players, the decisions of which will affect your actions and should affect the way that you make decisions on your strategic priorities as a nonprofit. So taking a look at the way in which others in the social ecosystem will and can affect you and how you need to be in direct relationship with them is extremely important when it comes to mapping or looking at or answering the question, we need capacity for what? It will be affected if you're looking at yourselves as an organization within the larger context of a social sector ecosystem. The question of how much do we want to grow? What is our appetite? What's our hunger for growth over the next 3 to 5 years? That is a huge question that really needs to be thought about when you're thinking about capacity. There are many organizations that say we're looking to scale, we're looking to double the number of people that we serve, we're looking to replicate in other communities, we're looking to take our model and to be able to sort of franchise it to others. There's many folks who give us this as an answer when we ask them, how are you intending to grow? We know from research that we've done over the past years that was done by my former colleague, Pete York, we know which capacities are absolutely essential for scaling and for growth, and we can marry that aspiration on the part of an organization with the CCAT scores and look at what's there and what's not there. It is impossible for an organization that does not have a really solid program model and a very solid connection of the programming to the mission and an understanding of what works and what doesn't work in their programming and a performance management system and a revenue model that supports that program delivery system. If you do not have all those things in place as an organization, which we can know from the CCAT scores, you are not in a position to replicate. It will not work. And so what that does is it highlights those capacities that need to be built over others in the immediate future, all right? I know this is a ton of information, and I promise to stop and leave some room for questions. We then, once we have the answers to those questions that involve the ecosystem, we ask an organization to go back to its CCAT report and to look at where it's scored, given all of the scores, as you know, in the CCAT, mapped to a certain position. There are algorithms that actually align or pinpoint a particular place in the organization's life cycle stages that it is living at this particular moment in time. The slide on your screen is an organization that positioned itself in the infrastructure development phase. The reason we pay so much attention to the life cycle stage placement is because it directly affects what capacities are most important to be built at this particular moment in the organization's life cycle. Now remember, we have a first stage here where you're looking simultaneously as you interpret these results with a nonprofit. You're looking at how you take these scores and you consider the external ecosystem, but this is looking at where the organization is at in its own development right now. This particular organization placed itself in the infrastructure development phase. What that means is that there are certain capacities in the CCAT that are going to be held up as priority over others because of the life cycle placement. Those priority areas may not be, and in many cases they're not, the subcapacities that the organization received the lowest, gave itself the lowest scores on, but instead they relate to those capacities that are most essential for this life cycle stage and where the scores or the subcapacity scores have been lowest, right? So these are the questions that, of course, you ask, and we're going to talk about, this is the regular interpretation questions that you ask, but where is the organization in the organizational life cycle? And then we go into what are the priority recommendations. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the core capacities and we're going to look at the subcapacities. And those of you that have heard recent webinars where I've shared with you that when we interpret CCATs, actually, page 10 in the CCAT report is the life cycle stage. Page 11 is the prioritized capacities. I do not, and we're in the process of revamping the way that the CCAT report looks, but I skip page 11. I don't go right to what those prioritized capacities are because I like to go through the core capacities individually and the subcapacities and start to tell the story of what those mean, and then I come back to page 11, which is the prioritized recommendations, and I'm going to talk you through that in just a second. So, as you're looking at the core capacities and the subcapacities, you, of course, ask the organizations to look at them and see if they make sense. If they don't make sense, help interpret them for them. Can these recommendations in each of the core capacities be grouped? Do they make sense in relationship to each other? And when you finish with that exercise of taking each of the core capacities and subcapacities, you've asked an organization to start to tell the story on there is one area, there is even though you're going to have priority recommendations in leadership, in management, in adaptive, and in technical, there is one area that is going to bubble up to the top that we work with the organization in a very, very tailored way to summarize that primary need and to focus the priority recommendations around that need and begin to tell that story, okay? What that looks like, so here's your capacity building plan, okay, your example 1. So in this one, you've got one subcapacity that is related to adaptive, one that is related, two that are related to leadership, and you've got 4 subcapacities that are actually related to management, okay? My guess, and if you read through these and you think, okay, increase your use of informal evaluation, increase the frequency with which leaders let the staff know how valuable their work is, increase the leader's ability to persuade staff members to change their attitudes. This is a leadership, under the leadership category, but there is a common theme emerging here. Promote constructive feedback by regularly checking in with the staff, increasing your leaders and your managers' conflict resolution skills, encouraging more of your staff to look for ways to do things more effectively. And as you read all of these, I would talk an organization through what's the main gist of what these are saying. To me, this particular organization, and this comes from a real organization, is really at a stage, and this particular organization is in the infrastructure development phase. And these all, to me, even though some of this involves leadership adaptation, some of this involves the adaptive piece, this is really focused on management overall. And if I had to pick one capacity, and you'll see why I'm doing that in a second, I would say, what's going on management-wise? Tell me the story right now and dig much deeper with that organization and let them tell you what's going on in that organization at that time. I'm going to skip by the last one because that's a separate one that I could talk you through, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward here. So we get to that place where we've identified, from looking at all the capacities, we've talked through them as a facilitator and an interpreter, we go back to the page with the priority recommendations, okay? And we basically, I'm sorry, go back. We have this little chart which does not currently appear in the CCAT report, but which will, which is very generic on one level, but it encapsulates the summary of what an organization would likely be working with if they had identified that management is their primary sort of sticking point right now, given all the scores that had come out of the CCAT and given the stories that they told you and given the conversation that you'd been facilitating. They're in infrastructure development, let's say, and this is a matrix. And if you take management across to the middle and you take infrastructure down, you end in a box that says HR and infrastructure management and performance measurement for sustainability and growth is what probably, and you will find it to be pretty stunning. I mean, remember, the organization gave you these scores. You didn't give it to them, they gave it to you. And what it all points to is that some shift in the capacity around the HR and infrastructure management and performance measurement for sustainability and growth needs to be supported at this particular moment more than anything else in that organization. And what I do is I drill down, usually in talking to the organization, and then this is where the organization begins to fill out a worksheet that helps them really have a conversation about what would that look like if we were to successfully build our capacity to have a really solid HR and infrastructure management and performance measurement system that would enable us to be more sustainable and grow. What would it look like in our organization? They will talk about that. It is the right thing for them. Remember, they're the ones who put these scores up there. They will tell you exactly what that means. And what you have been able to do as a facilitator is pretty profound. And this comes to what is currently in the CCAT report that you're all familiar with. And one of the bonuses of the CCAT report is that it does have recommendations for how you might want to take each of your priority capacities that are listed on page 11 and how you might want to actually take action internally in the organization to move the needle on that, to make progress on that. It also gives you suggestions on how you might want to focus on that particular subcapacity if you were to work with an outside consultant. We're going out on a limb here, but having spent decades as a CEO or an executive director of a nonprofit and having run a foundation that focused on capacity building for our grantees that were grassroots youth-serving organizations, we have started to question the reality of an organization getting the fabulous information and the data that is encompassed in the CCAT, even with facilitation and interpretation, without going deeper. How realistic is it to think that organizations are truly capable of making that change happen in their organizations without a neutral third party taking them through a more detailed, action-oriented process that doesn't take very long and is something we have started to share with organizations using the CCAT data. So the first question, once they've identified what it is they want, this is step 4 of our 6, what it is they want to actually make a change in, and for where do they need to build the capacity in the organization, and they have started to address capacity for what by using the matrix and by using the lens of what would this mean in terms of our relationship with others in the ecosystem. And you as a facilitator and a consultant are helping them continually keep those lenses in front of them. Then you ask, so if you were to do this, what would it look like? And who in the organization would best enable the organization to really build that capacity were they to have the kinds of supports that they need? Who are the change agents? This is not about blaming anybody. It's about saying, where would that lever exist? Who needs to have their capacity built to shift or change what we've identified is most important to us right now, okay? And this can sometimes be the CEO. It can sometimes be the CEO and the senior management team. It can sometimes be the development team. It can sometimes be the board and the CEO. Depending on what the what is, you're going to have a much clearer picture of who the who is. And you name those people, and you figure out who would be responsible for making this change happen, who's accountable for it, In other words, where does the buck stop and where are the decisions? With whom do you need to consult in order to make this happen smoothly, this change management, right? And then who needs to be informed on a regular basis that this is going on? And we ask you to think about this, and partly the reason we ask you to really think about this clearly is to get it done. But the other piece that's really something we always want to remember is that any change, I love this Mark Twain quote, you know, I'm all in for progress, it's change that I object to. You all know from being consultants and capacity builders and change management folks that change is uncomfortable, there's a lot of communication involved, and just to think through this very deliberately around the capacity you're trying to build, capacity building equates to change. And it's not always real comfortable because people get threatened, and managing those relationships is really important. So once you've figured out who those change agents are, you ask yourself the question, how ready are these folks who need their capacity built? How ready are they to actually do that? In other words, are they even aware that they need to have their capacity built? Are they aware but they need to have certain skills imparted to them and learn certain things, get better at certain things in order to be able to make the change you're talking about? Or, and this is the case in many cases with the CEO or the board, are they aware they need to build their capacity and they have the skills they need, but they just need the assistance or the coaching, and this is where executive coaching becomes so important, to get it to happen. And this is where understanding what level of readiness folks are at is essential in terms of delivering the capacity successfully and helping the change really take place. Way too often, as you, I'm sure, have experienced, both in and in assistance to nonprofits, it's not that they lack the skills, it's not that they lack the awareness, but it strictly is that that change isn't going to happen because everybody just honestly has too much on their plate, and there's nobody in charge of prioritizing that capacity building change and making it happen. So this is a worksheet that we do share with the folks who use the CCAT now, and we will send it to all of you, that helps do what we call a RACI analysis, which is the responsible, accountable, consult, and inform framework, and helps you identify what the change is, who needs to change, and what level of awareness or readiness are they at. This will determine the kind of capacity that needs to be built most at this time. The last question and the last step that we ask is, so what do you need in order, now that you've identified what it is that needs to be changed and where the capacity needs to be built, who is it, and what are the resources needed, you can make a really intelligent case for where you will get those needed capacities and the type of capacity you need. And sometimes it's in-house, sometimes it's in your community, sometimes it's with peer organizations, and sometimes it's about getting the money to be able to hire the consultants to deliver what you need. But at least you have a really clear sense of where it is and what it is that you need. So we've talked about this relational capacity piece that is so important in helping organizations appreciate and understand how to target the capacities that they need, right? And finally, you know, people say, okay, so these are still individual in nature. Okay, this comes back to that notion of capacity building learning communities, right? You've got your funders and the folks who are on the support side who have to be clear about what their own goals are in being able to raise the bar, the whole, you know, raising the entire, all the boats on the seas. Everyone in the social sector, all the nonprofits need to be able to come up, all their grant partners. And these are the foundation goals, and this is just an example of one of the one of the groups of foundations we've worked with, who identified that these are their goals in delivering capacity building to their grantees. And then what we did was we took all of the data, the targeted capacity building data that we had collected, and we aggregated all that data, and we pull it all together, and we look at it and we slice it in all sorts of different ways. We begin to cluster in an entire community the readiness and which organizations are truly ready to engage in a very deep dive in capacity building to make significant change because they're at that place where if you invested it in that way as funders, it would really stick and it would really take. There are others that are just not in that place, and if they were to get a deep capacity building investment at this point, it would probably be pretty disruptive, and it would really affect or impact negatively the way they deliver their services. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have their capacity built. It just means that you have a different, very different delivery mechanism, and you would cluster those together, and you would come up with some initiatives and design capacity building supports that would meet the readiness levels of those organizations. They would potentially work together in a peer, in some kind of peer collective way, a peer cluster, and learn from each other. And then there are other organizations that are so large or they have such capacity internally that they actually, what they need is an investment in their internal capacity building systems. And sometimes that takes the form of a larger programmatic or general operating grant, but those organizations wouldn't necessarily benefit by being engaged in, say, a 10-member cohort that was in a deep dive capacity building 2-year initiative. But you'd potentially circuit additional support in the way of funds to those organizations to enhance their internal capacity building. So we marry the grantee needs that we've figured out from the clusters to what the foundations want to do in that way, and we help design usually a multi-year capacity building system that is something the community commits to sharing and engaging in moving into the future. So this is just a visual of what it looks like when we build capacity building learning communities, okay? It's about, this, as you see on the left, the funders supporting the cohort. They're doing the initial investment in the diagnostic and figuring out what capacities need to be built. It moves into developing a capacity building plan, and then the funders are committed to implementing the plan and funding that plan so that all of those actors in the community are having their capacities raised. This is a shift in the power dynamic usually between a grantor and a grantee relationship. I noticed that in future incarnations of this PowerPoint, I might fix the lettering on the Stronger Nonprofits box on the right. Sorry about that. But basically, this is something that we like to see moving forward on an ongoing basis. So I am going to stop here. I know you probably have a ton of questions. I have flown through this in a way that, oops, sorry, back up, in a way that probably has touched on a whole bunch of areas that you'd love some more information on. I'd be delighted to give that to you. But Keisha, if you could unmute everybody at this point in time, if people have questions that you have either sent to Keisha along the way, you know, in using your chat function, which I forgot to invite you to do, but which I'm going to invite you right now to share with me. So if you're not talking, though, if you could mute yourself, because I'm listening to really loud typing at the moment by one of you guys. If you could mute yourself, but be sure to unmute yourself when you want to ask a question, that would be brilliant. So identify yourself if you could, and I welcome any and all questions on any of that enormous amount of information that I just sort of put before you. Eleanor, are you there? Oh, I guess you're just making noise. It came up as you're speaking. Is there anybody who has any questions whatsoever on any aspect of this? And maybe you could share when you do ask a question, or even if you don't want to ask a question, just share sort of whether you've had any experiences working in this way where you use the CCAT differently, or you have gone deeper in using it as a diagnostic in light of the fact that there are folks in the community that want to do this on an ongoing basis. And don't forget to unmute yourselves if you could. Anybody? Anybody want to ask a question? If not, that's great, but I would imagine that, and don't be shy, just if anybody wants to not ask a question, but just let us know a little bit more about how you've used the CCAT in the past, and if any of this feels like it's familiar to you, or if you think it wouldn't work in your community because, I mean, remember also, I just want to say this is a pilot experiment that we're doing. We don't have all the answers. We are in continual learning. As you see, there's a learning loop that is very important to us, that is a part of this graphic here. And so we're learning from each of these we do. We have done this with individual funders in Austin, in Dothan, Alabama. We're in the process of working with folks in Greenville, South Carolina. We're in the very early stages of working with rural cohorts around Georgia, with the Walmart and the Tyson folks in Northwest Alabama, in communities there, and with local consultants in each place, if they exist. Looking into Southern Illinois, looking into Miami, as I said. So I'd love to know from any of you who are on the phone. I'm talking, I know Catherine's on the phone from Calgary, and we're talking about doing some work up there. And again, these are all, you know, some are several years down the road, and they're really cooking with gas. I'd say Austin is in that place. Dothan, Alabama is really moving forward. So we have folks at different stages of this that I know are always, I shouldn't volunteer them, but they've been incredibly generous in talking to others who are interested in potentially, you know, piloting or starting this kind of work. If there's a chance that you as consultants feel that your local funders would potentially be interested in this, we love to work in conjunction with you and in partnership with you to serve as your partner in engaging your local funders to take an interest in this and to, you know, start exploring it. And we're happy to come and talk with any groups of local funders that we, you know, that we think might be interested. Anybody?
No.
All right. Well, if you guys really don't have any questions, and I'm hoping that you're really unmuted and you're not feeling frustrated by not being able to say anything, can one of you guys just say something so I can be sure that you are unmuted? Is there anybody there? Hello?
Hi.
Something?
Hi. Thank you. All right, I know you're out there. Great. Did this make sense? Did this not make sense? Is there something that feels like it just would or wouldn't work in your community? Or maybe you could share with me one area of this that feels affirming or that you'd like to have more information about, maybe not right now, but that we could potentially think about doing additional webinars on, which would further explain some of the things you heard today.
I don't know if I'm the fellow who's connected to you at this point, but I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on how TCC views the role of the local consultant in the
Great.
capacity building process.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you. I made sort of scant reference to that, but that is very important, and that's important for most of you because most of you are local consultants. We have, and we are encouraging more to come into our orbit, but many of you on this call may be already certified or credentialed facilitators or interpreters of the CCAT. And if you're not, we are delighted to talk to you about how to do that. It's free and it's not very hard, and it is really a wonderful, we're actually putting quite a bit more energy into building a community of all of you who are CCAT facilitators to learn from you and have you learn from each other. But it is the local consultant is part of the initial, what we call development team that is constructing what the vision for a local capacity building learning community would look like. It's essential you're at the table as that local consultant, and your voice is very important in going through this entire initiative. What we do, what we encourage the funders who are willing to support this investment to do is we put money in the initial budget that the funders agree to put out for on the front end to get the information, do the targeted capacity building. We insist that the local consultants are along for the ride. And so there is money in the budget to pay you for your time so that you can shadow and move through and work in close partnership with us at TCC, because we have a lot to learn from you. And our goal is to familiarize you and make you as comfortable as possible with this process so that you can then make it your own and add whatever you like to it. But the goal would be to use data to be able to pinpoint with your local nonprofits exactly what capacity needs to be built, capacity for what within the local ecosystem, and to talk those folks through, as we would the first time around, exactly who it is, how ready they are, and what the capacities they need built would take in the way of resources. And you become the direct connect to those local organizations moving forward, because the idea would be as soon as they identify what it is they actually could use and how they'd get it, the foundations and the funders have a commitment to supporting that in the design of an initiative, and you and your fellow local consultants would be the ones to actually deliver the capacity building supports that have been identified that they've been funded for. So what you do in one, from one perspective is, this builds in job security for you guys. You are essential in this picture in that you're the ones who are directly delivering the capacity building moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I'm understanding you correctly then, that the role that TCC plays is actually helping to facilitate the collective impact of the community learning process.
That's right.
In terms of the development of it, but it's left to the local community, including the local consultant, to actually actualize the plan that is developed.
That's exactly correct. That was lovely. Thank you. That was exactly right. That's correct.
Well,
we are the framers. That is our role. Thank you. That's a great question. Great question. So I promised that I would keep all of you for an hour, which I have. And I know we started about 3 or 4 minutes late, so we're ending about 2 minutes late, and I'm sorry about that. But I would love to thank you all for joining us today. We will make sure that you learn about all of the upcoming webinars. We'll go in greater depth in several upcoming webinars, and we'll be starting a learning group with any of you who are interested in that. If any of you are not certified CCAT facilitators and would like more information on that, you would get in touch with Keisha, who is the person who's been sending you the announcements and the invitations for the webinar. Keisha's, I'm going to go to my last slide so you can see my email address. This is my email address, and I welcome any and all communication from you all. What we will send you after I hang up with you today is we will send you a copy of this PowerPoint, and we will send you a copy of the 3.0 paper in case you don't have it, and we will send you the worksheet that I referenced, the matrix that is not, it's in this PowerPoint, but the worksheet that we referenced. I don't recommend, unless you're really brave, I don't recommend that you take it and start moving it forward with the folks with which you're working without a little bit more information. And if you do, all we ask is, this is about open source, people. We just ask that TCC is credited with the thought leadership on this, and that's all we ask. And if you're in a community where you feel that it would be valuable for us to potentially interact with some of your funders or your other consultants, for that matter, to build a consultant pool of peers, definitely let me know, let us know. As soon as we hang up, you're going to get a survey that has maybe 2 or 3 questions that'll take about 30 seconds at the most, maybe 20 to answer. We would really appreciate it if you could do that. And so I'm going to sign off and thank you guys for joining us today. And I look forward to continued conversation with all of you in the very near future. All right? So have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend, people. Thanks so much.